Hey everybody, this is Bobby Constantino here, and I'm coming to you live for the second week in a row, and today I want to talk about gun violence in the city of Baltimore. Last week I did a deep dive into the data around how the city is allocating its funding when it comes to gun violence prevention, and I found that basically the city of Boston is spending upwards of $300 million on programs that all of the data show don't work, and roughly $1 million or so on programs that all of the data show do work. And so when I looked at the data last week in Boston, I found that this is a completely backwards allocation of funding resources, and it made me curious about what was happening in other cities. And so this week, I took a look at the data in Baltimore to try and do an analysis of how the city is allocating funding towards preventing youth gun violence there. And as I said earlier, there's just some more people tuning in now. As I said earlier, what I found in Baltimore is much, much worse than what I saw in Boston last week. And so today I'm going to break down the data and get into it. So the first thing I want to do is I want to start with a report from 2012 out of Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, out of the Bloomberg School of Public Health. This is a report from 2012, and what this is it's an evaluation of a program in Baltimore that was designed to prevent gun violence. And I'm going to spare you all of the nitty-gritty and jump right to it, because basically, this is page 5. On the conclusion, you can see in that last paragraph there, the researchers who have doctorates in statistics found that 3 of the 4 program sites of what Baltimore calls Safe Streets, which is a gun violence prevention program, 3 of the 4 program sites experienced large, statistically significant, program-related reductions in homicides or non-fatal shootings. So basically what that means is that this Safe Streets program that was implemented in Baltimore, it was implemented with a $1.6 million grant from the Department of Justice, worked, and it worked very well. And the results that it prevented, the homicides and non-fatal shootings that it prevented, were directly related to the program. Now I'm just going to jump real quickly into some of the hot spots in Baltimore, because I think this is very important about what this report shows. And here it says right here, in Cherry Hill, which was one of the 4 trial sites for Safe Streets, the program was associated with statistically significant reductions of 56% in homicides and 34% in non-fatal shootings. McElderry Park did not experience a homicide during the first 22 months of program implementation. Think about that for a second. This is one of Baltimore's gun violence trial sites that has some of the highest numbers in terms of non-fatal shootings and homicides in the city. And for 22 months during the implementation, that trial site did not see a single homicide. Okay? Now this is the part I want to focus on. Homicides increased during the period when program supervisors and staff also concerned themselves with a new Safe Streets site. And why this is significant is because the researchers that did this evaluation are trying to highlight the fact that if you don't implement this program properly, if you skimp with funding, if you try and spread these employees too thin, then the program is not going to work. And so what the researchers here is that because this trial site was spread too thin, as you can see here on page 3, there would have been more than 10 additional homicide incidents prevented had there not been an increase in the Madison East End staffing trial site, which means that those 10 additional homicides could have been prevented had not staff been spread. All right, so this report is basically irrefutable evidence that the city of Baltimore knows what works. The city of Baltimore has data in its custody and control for the last 5 years at least that shows unequivocally that there are intervention program models that work very effectively to shut down gun violence. Okay? Now I'm going to pivot quickly to some data from the City of Baltimore's Public Health Department from 2015. And you see right here, this is notes that I took when I was writing a column for The Guardian about gun violence. According to the Baltimore City Health Department in Cherry Hill, which is another one of the same trial sites, there hadn't been a gun homicide in over a year. This is as of May 2015, which, as many people from Baltimore know, was the most violent month of the most violent year in city history. In Mondamin, the hotspot site that had been accused of hiring violence interrupters connected to gangs and drug dealing and that had its funding and staff suspended twice, there wasn't a single shooting in the entire month of May. Same thing in Park Heights. Okay? Meanwhile, in the city's police-only hotspots, so these are the other 8 hotspots in the city of Baltimore where Safe Streets is not operating, shootings were up as much as 83%. Okay, so what this basically says is that in the 4 trial sites where Safe Streets was implemented originally, which was in 2007, in the most violent month of the city's most violent year on record, a handful of underfunded, basically minimum wage earning employees without benefits, health insurance, or anything else, right, whose funding is getting turned on and off again, and who basically don't know if they're going to show up the next day and have a job, right? This group of employees is outperforming a 3,000 plus employee police department with a $300+ million budget, okay? Because in the police only hotspots where the Safe Streets program is not working, shootings are up 83%. Yet in the Safe Streets trial sites, what this data shows is that shootings were basically non-existent. Okay? So I'm going to move quickly on to a chart that basically shows what I'm talking about in real time. Now, this is a graph that tracks homicides in the city of Baltimore in blue, and in orange you see the homicide clearance rate, which is the rate at which the police department of the city of Baltimore is successfully clearing homicide cases, which means making an arrest or doing their job, okay? And as you see here in 2014, 2015, when the problem in Baltimore is reaching its worst crescendo in the city's history, you see gun homicides spiking and you see homicide clearance rates plummeting. And basically what this shows is that policing your way out of gun violence never works. When it starts to rise, what happens is the police begin to crack down harder and harder and harder, and by doing so, they undermine the entire purpose of the public safety apparatus. The whole entire purpose of the police making arrests and bringing cases to court for arraignment is to prove those cases at trial beyond a reasonable doubt. It's the whole entire purpose of all of the work that the police do. Okay? And by going out in response to increases in non-fatal shootings and homicides and throwing people against cars and going through their pockets and violating their rights, they create an increase in distrust, and they make it so that people in the community don't want to participate with them. They don't want to show up for anything that the police ask them to because they don't trust them, and rightfully so, they don't like them. Because who's going to trust you and like you when you're constantly, assaulting them, when you're being assaulted, when your rights are being violated? Obviously, the answer is no one. And so, what I think this shows, and I'm just going to quickly pivot to a headline that shows you that what I'm saying has been reported widely in the newspapers: Baltimore police solving disturbingly low number of the city's murders. So in 2015, which was the most violent year on record in the city of Baltimore, the police were clearing around 30% of gun homicides. Okay? So clearly the police are failing to do their jobs in solving gun homicides 70% of the time or more. Okay? Which shows you what doesn't work, right? The police don't work in these kinds of situations. Meanwhile, all of the data that we saw out of Johns Hopkins shows what does work. And so now I want to look quickly at the data in terms of how how the city has invested in what it knows does work and in what it knows doesn't work. Okay? So first we'll start with Safe Streets. Here's an article from this past August, which basically says that the governor of the state of Maryland is going to cut Safe Streets from the budget altogether. And if you notice there, it says Safe Streets operates in 4 city neighborhoods on a budget of $1.2 million. So already you can see that the program that the data shows works has been cut by a quarter, right? Is the first grant that funded the program was $1.6 million. So you can see that the funding for this program has already been cut by $400,000. Okay? And then this administration that's in Annapolis is proposing to cut the program altogether from the budget. Okay? And then a few weeks later, after the City Health Department's commissioner, Leanna Wen, basically said this is a death sentence. If you cut these fundings, people are going to die, right? The governor announced that he's only going to cut the program by more than half. So you see this highly effective program. This highly effective program that has been proven to save lives. Statistically, the data shows that if you implement this program, you will see this many reductions in shootings, right? They're going to cut it altogether. On the contrary, if you look at what doesn't work, which is the police, what you will see here, this is a tweet, sorry for the shakiness, this is a tweet from a reporter from the Baltimore Sun, and he's basically tracking the funding of the Baltimore Police Department. And the funding here goes from around 2012, which was the time of the evaluation of Safe Streets, when there were roughly 197 or 200 or so murders a year, from 353 million to 414 million. It's almost level funded in 14. And then you see the funding for the police department going up to 455 million. So that's 100 million more dollars than in 2011. And you see an increase of murders of 147. And then from there, that wasn't enough for people in Baltimore to come to their senses. You see them getting $20 more million the next year and $5 more million the next. Now, I don't know how anyone can look at this data and look at the proposed cuts to Safe Streets and not conclude that this is anything other than premeditated murder. Okay? You have a report out of Johns Hopkins University that was presented to you and funded for you as administrators of the city of Baltimore and as the governor of the state of Maryland. Okay? Your health commissioner has been saying this for years. Your mayor has been saying for years that this program works. And the data shows unequivocally that this program works. The corresponding decreases that you have seen in homicides, if you remove this program, are going to become actual homicides. And then you still, nevertheless, have the city of Baltimore and the governor of Maryland proposing to cut the funding for these programs, even though they know that there's going to be a corresponding increase in the number of people that are shot and killed. So when the doors of this program close in these 4 trial sites, okay, and shootings and retaliation killings that could have been prevented happen, when the next 7, 8, or 9-year-old is caught in the crossfire and killed, when the next grandmother or pregnant mother is caught in the crossfire and killed, how can you not call that premeditated murder? How can you not claim to be responsible for those people losing their lives when you know that if you cut this funding, there's going to be a corresponding increase in the number of those non-fatal shootings and in the number of those homicides? How can you claim like you're not responsible for that when you knowingly cut the funding for a program that all of the data out of the best university in the state shows you is going to happen? You can't do that and claim to not be responsible. The one and only excuse that I've heard, the one and only justification for why these programs are not going to be funded is that the city of Baltimore has no money. Okay? And I want to explore that for a minute because I think that that is absolute bullshit. Look at the spending numbers. This is a city that has no money. Between 2011 and 2017, you've increased funding for the police, which your data shows you don't work, by over $130 million. $130 million for a department that has proven itself completely ineffective. $130 million for a department that has been completely ineffective at solving gun violence. And you're telling me that you're broke? Worse than that. Much worse than that. Look at this. Investigation. Baltimore police brutality settlements cost taxpayers $11.5 million. $11.5 million is enough to fund Safe Streets and expand it to all 12 of Baltimore's gun violence hotspots for several years. So the city of Baltimore is claiming that it has no money to fund a program that all of the data shows will save a ton of lives, right? No money to save all of these lives, okay? But we have $11.5 million to pay for the settlements of our police who commit misconduct. Now, normally, if you commit misconduct in any other kind of, environment, you're going to be held personally responsible for that, right? You're going to get taken to court, you're going to get sued, and the sheriff's going to come and take your house and your car and everything else. Because that's normally what you do in a situation when someone breaks the law, right? Right, you'd think so. But here you have the city of Baltimore basically volunteering this amount of cash to cover the judgments that their police incur for breaking the law, meanwhile claiming that the city has no money, zero, none, not even $1 to fund a program that the last 5 years of data at least show is highly effective at preventing gun homicides. So in the lead into this, I said that, I don't know, this is akin to premeditated murder, and I don't know how it's not. I want someone to disprove to me that that's what this is. Okay, because here you have policymakers who know that if they cut this program, that there's going to be an increase in people dying. They know this. The data shows this. There's no arguing about that, right? And you have them bald-faced lying to you, telling you that there's no money to fund this program. Meanwhile, they're shelling out hundreds of million dollars to a department that's completely broken, right? A department that's being grossly outperformed by a tiny handful of employees who have no helicopters, no guns, no tanks, no SWAT teams, nothing except themselves, no health insurance, no pensions, nothing protecting them. They're being outperformed by a group of guys who are going into these neighborhoods and literally shutting down homicides and shootings for a fraction of the cost, right? And the city has no money to fund that program, but it can funnel hundreds of millions of dollars into a program that's completely not working at all and failing 70% of the time to clear gun homicide cases. So that's the end of my broadcast this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please, if you live in Baltimore and you know people that are affected by this, share this with them. Let them know the truth. Let them know the facts. Our city and state elected officials cannot continue to get away with lying about this. They've been lying about it for years. The data has been showing that they're completely wrong for years, and no one is holding them accountable. All of these academics and people who are supposedly the gatekeepers of this knowledge, who are supposedly the ones that are supposed to be advocating for a fairer and more just criminal justice system, are completely dropping the ball. They're letting these elected officials skate on this, and it's time for the people to stop letting them do it, because this has got to stop. All right? I'm going to get into the data on Chicago next week because, believe it or not, Chicago is even worse than Baltimore in what I've seen so far. I'm going to do a little more homework, a little more research, and I'm going to talk about Chicago next week. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in, and stay well. Bless you.